Well, the Treasurer and Deputy Prime Minister Wayne Swan helped negotiate the deal with the independents. He joins us in our Parliament House studio. Treasurer, good morning.
Good morning, Fran.
And congratulations.
Thank you very much.
What's it like to learn your election fate via a press conference on the television?
Well, you know, you're on tenterhooks, aren't you? So we were watching like everybody else, but we had very good discussions with all of the independents and minor parties over the 2-week period. We had very good discussions with all of them, but we did await that decision like the rest of the country.
In the end, of course, it was the closest of shaves, political salvation for Labor by one vote. Labor lost 17 seats in this election. You've won government by one vote. As you contemplate that, is your mood celebratory? Was it sort of sheer relief when you heard it last night, or fear at what lies ahead?
No, I think that there are very significant obligations and responsibilities that flow from the decision that the Australian people took. It is a very close result, and the Australian people are very clearly saying that they do want everybody in the Parliament to find more common ground. And that is the spirit to which we brought our party to the discussions with the other political parties over the last couple of weeks.
There are plenty of opportunities in this, according to Julia Gillard. I wonder what excites you about this parliament you're now a part of.
Well, the government's very keen to get on with the job of broadening and strengthening the economy, of providing opportunity, particularly through our investments in health and education and broadband. We've got a very significant economic plan. We need to unite the country behind that economic plan. We have to build the consensus given the state of the Parliament, not just on the floor of the Parliament, but I also think more broadly in the community. You know, the things that we do together are the things that make us strong. And I think one of the lessons that the Prime Minister and the government has learnt from the last period in power is that we have to spend more time talking to the community, building that consensus. And I believe Prime Minister Gillard is uniquely placed to build that consensus. She did it with the Fair Work Act, she did it with the resolution to the mining tax, and we are going to have to do that again and again, given the numbers in the Parliament.
How hard is it going to be to get on the job? Because, you know, talking about the numbers, you're one by-election away from disaster, that's been said. Parliament on eggshells, is that what we're in for? Are you going to be very cautious about bold decision-making?
No, I think what
Are you going to be allowed to make bold decisions?
Oh, I think we have to take the right decisions in the national interest. We've got a very significant economic program, big investments which need to be made in superannuation to build up our national savings, dealing with the issues of company taxation, bringing down the corporate rate, making those investments, those fundamental nation-building investments in broadband, but also in health and education. This is a very big program. It's a very exciting time for Australia, given Mining Boom Mark 2.
Not everyone's excited. There are, not surprisingly, plenty of doomsayers out there. Let me quote one. Alan Mitchell in the Financial Review says, quote, "This will be a weak and hopefully short-lived government." That's under the heading, the government hostage to rent seekers. It's negative because a good government that lost its way, by your own admission, has been re-elected.
Well, this government got some of the very big economic decisions right. The biggest economic decision in 75 years this government got right. And of course, if we hadn't got that right, and the Liberals had been in power, we would be wading through the rubble of a recession, of high unemployment and of capital destruction. Now, we got that decision right, and the consequence is that we are one of the strongest growing advanced economies. And we now have a very great opportunity to maximise the opportunities that are going to flow from growth, particularly in our region, and we have an economic program to do that. What we have to do through this period in government is to unite the Parliament and the people behind that program, because if we get that program in place, then we can maximise those opportunities, which will spread opportunities to all Australians, wherever they live, in the cities or in the regions.
And obviously uniting the Parliament is the challenge. Let's just take a look at how it might work. I mean, what if we get a double-dip recession? You, as Treasurer, and Julia Gillard need to rush through a new stimulus package. You now have to get Rob Oakeshott, Tony Windsor, Adam Bandt, Andrew Wilkie all to agree, all the opposition. It's a path strewn with obstacles.
Well, I'm not going to speculate about the outcome, but let's just look at what did happen last time when there was a very significant economic challenge and we had to put through a very significant package. We got the votes of the minor parties. We got the votes of the independents. On that occasion, the votes we didn't get were the votes of the Liberal and National parties. Now, I don't want to rake over that, but that was a very good example of where Australia came together. Employers and employees, the community generally, worked because of that fundamental economic disaster that was unfolding in the global economy. And the consequence of us working together is that we did avoid recession. And we now have stronger economic foundations as we move forward because the whole of the country came together in the face of that external threat. So I think that is one example of where the government did work and did build a consensus to deal with a very significant challenge for our economy, but not just for our economy, but for our society.
Well, your first test is you did get the votes of the two independents to back you for government, but they didn't come cheap. Close to $10 billion will be spent on regional Australia. Fair enough, the country needs more health, better hospitals, it needs more education funding for schools. So do other parts of the country, though. An extra $10 billion for the bush, does that mean $10 billion less for the cities and suburbs?
No, it does not. It doesn't mean that at all. These decisions are consistent with our fiscal rules. But secondly, we have a very broad program to invest in infrastructure across the country.
But you have agreed to prioritise funding for the bush.
Well, we've certainly agreed to prioritise funding in some of our programs, that is true, to make sure that they get their fair share. So we've said a third of some programs should go to regional Australia. That's only fair. That's roughly the proportion. Sometimes that hasn't been achieved in some programs. So we've agreed with the independents for a process to make sure that there's a fair share going to regional Australia. That's what we've agreed to, and that's reasonable.
But if there's no new money here, then you've got to take from Peter to give to Paul.
No, there is some new money, and we have made savings to fund some of the new investments that we are making. But what you have to understand is that for the past 3 years, we have already been investing significantly in rural Australia. We were talking before about the stimulus. When we rolled the stimulus out, we rolled it out right across the country. We sent it to the far corners of every electorate. This is the first time such a program like that has been done in that way. So in Bob Katter's electorate of Kennedy or up in New England, those investments were made in some of the smallest and remote schools right across the country. We have a good track record, and that is why we could sit down with the independents and talk about how we move forward, particularly in health and education, to build on that program we'd put in place over 3 years.
It's 11 minutes to 8 on RM Breakfast. Now, our guest this morning is Treasurer and Deputy Prime Minister Wayne Swan. Wayne Swan, on the mining tax, you said you want it finalised this year. Rob Oakeshott, Independent, says he would like the original 40% proposal back on the table at next year's tax summit that you've agreed on with the independents. Earlier this morning on Breakfast, Tony Windsor said he was under the impression it would be on the table at the tax summit. Let's have a listen.
I thought it was going to be included in any discussions in relation to the Henry Review.
You've got some power here. Will you insist on it?
Well, we may talk about that, yes.
We've got a commitment to the minerals resource rent tax. We made that commitment at the election, and we have a committee which is being chaired by Don Argus who's looking at all of the detail. And certainly Tony Windsor and the independents will have views about the design of that tax, which they can express to the government. But we have to move forward with legislation because that tax is funding some of the very important investments in superannuation, in infrastructure, and cuts to the corporate rate. What we've said more broadly about a discussion on tax is that those elements of the Henry Review that we have not agreed to or ruled out should be the subject of an extensive discussion in the community through this term of Parliament.
So just to be clear, because this is a good example of the sort of negotiating confusion that could happen, you're not anticipating the mining tax being at next year's tax summit?
No, but I am involving all members of the Parliament, including the independents, in the discussion because this is legislation that is yet to go to the Parliament. So what we are doing now, particularly through the Argus Committee, is finalising all of the design features of the tax. There'll be extensive consultation about that. We will need to talk to all members of the Parliament about that before the legislation is finalised and prioritised in terms of its passage through the Parliament.
Well, we heard Tony Windsor say he might like to talk to you about that. Is this the first indication of how difficult this new crossbench alliance
Not at all,
might
because
be?
I've had that discussion with Tony Windsor, and I will have many more discussions with Tony Windsor and other members of the Parliament. I've had the discussion with Bob Katter. All of these things will be on the table. It's a discussion that I welcome. Certainly a discussion that I welcome because it's very important for regional Australia, particularly when it comes to investment in infrastructure.
Wayne Swan, did you have any inkling of how the independents were going to go, that you were going to be re-elected into government again yesterday?
No, they were very clear with us, particularly through the last 48 hours, that they would make their announcement publicly in the way in which they did. So we were given no advance warning as to how they would go by either the two independents or Mr Katter.
And are you confident this election will go 3 years, this Parliament?
Yes, I am. I'm very optimistic that it can go for 3 years. I believe that we've got a very good program. I believe we've got the capacity to work and find common ground, not just with the independents, but I hope with with the opposition parties. I think we've got the best prospects of making this work. Minority governments supported solidly by independents have a good track record of success in this country, and there's no reason it can't happen in the federal parliament.
Well, I hope your voice holds up, because there's going to be a lot of talking to do between now and the next election in 3 years' time. Treasurer Wayne Swan, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.